I built the deck the way I built everything worth keeping. Slow, level, board by board, checking my work twice before moving on. 4 days after my daughter, her husband, and my granddaughter moved into the house I'd paid off 11 years ago, I heard her telling that little girl how to smile at strangers and ask for money outside the grocery store. That night I asked her, gently, to stop. She looked at me like I'd spit on the floor and said, "You've done enough damage for one lifetime, old man." My son-in-law didn't even look up from his phone. "If you can't keep your opinions to yourself," he said, "maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." He said it in my own kitchen. He forgot whose name was on the deed. Welcome back, friend. Thank you for sitting with me a while. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single comment, every one. A quick note before we start. Some details in this story have been changed to protect the people in it. But what it leaves behind in you, that part's real. My name is Walter Pruitt. I'm 66 years old, a retired boiler mechanic, and for the last 22 years I've owned a brick two-story on Cardinal Ridge Road outside Dayton, Ohio. My wife Margaret and I bought it the spring our daughter turned 9, back when the maple out front was a stick you could snap with 2 fingers. Now it shades half the yard and drops enough leaves every October to fill 14 paper bags, and I count them, because counting things is a way of proving to yourself that time is still moving in an orderly direction, even when nothing else is. Margaret's been gone 6 years now. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much warning and doesn't negotiate once it arrives. People tell me it gets easier. What I've found is that it doesn't get easier so much as you get better at carrying it without anyone noticing the weight. Some nights I still make 2 plates out of habit before I catch myself and put one back in the fridge. Her reading glasses are still on the nightstand. I'm not ready to move them, and I've stopped pretending to myself that I will be soon. For most of those 6 years I lived here by myself, and I want to be honest with you, I liked the quiet more than I expected to. The furnace ticking as it cooled, rain on the gutters, my own footsteps on the stairs. Some men can't stand that kind of silence. I found it decent company. Then, 16 months ago, my daughter Renee called me on a Sunday evening. She was 34 then, working part-time at a dental office, married to a man named Corey who sold insurance out of a strip mall office on the east side, and mother to my granddaughter, Nora, who'd just turned 6. Renee said things had gotten tight. Corey had lost a chunk of his commission when a client backed out. Their landlord had raised the rent $200 with 30 days' notice, and they were behind on the car. She asked if they could stay with me a few months while they got their footing back. I said yes before she'd finished the sentence. Not for Renee, if I'm being honest with you the way I try to be honest with everybody in my life. For Nora, that little girl walked through my front door with a backpack shaped like a ladybug and her small hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers, and something in my chest that had been sitting very still for a long while just shifted. She has Margaret's eyes, that same sharp, patient way of studying a room before deciding what to make of it, like she's working out a puzzle nobody else can see yet. I want to tell you about a morning in April. I was up early the way I always am. Coffee made strong the way Margaret used to tease me about. Mug in hand out on the back steps watching the yard wake up. The hydrangeas along the fence were just starting to bud, that pale green promise before the color comes in, and the air still had that clean, cold edge that Ohio mornings lose fast once May arrives. I heard the screen door and then small sneakers on the concrete steps. Grandpa Walt. Nora climbed up next to me in her unicorn pajamas, hair every direction, dragging a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed soft from years of love. She settled against my side like she had every right to be there, the way children do when a place has never once made them feel like a guest. "Morning, Peanut," I said. "You're up with the birds." I had a dream about Grandma Margaret. She announced it with the total seriousness only a 6-year-old can manage. My heart did something complicated, the way it always does when Margaret's name comes up unannounced. Did you know? She was in a kitchen making pancakes, and she gave me the first one, even though it was the ugly one. Nora looked up at me. Was she nice for real, or just nice in dreams? I looked out at the hydrangeas. "She was the kindest person I ever met in 66 years of living," I said. "She would have thought the sun rose just to see your face, Nora." She considered this with great care. "Even the ugly pancake?" "Especially the ugly pancake." She nodded like that settled something important, and leaned her whole small weight into my arm. We sat like that a while, watching a squirrel work over the bird feeder Margaret had hung on the maple 15 years back, and I thought about how joy can live in something as plain and specific as a child leaning against your ribs while the morning takes its time arriving. "Grandpa Walt," she said, "are those Grandma's flowers?" She planted them the year your mama started high school, I told her. I'm gonna tell mommy they're magic, she decided, and I smiled at that. The way you smile at something that costs you nothing and gives you everything. Then she went quiet, swinging her feet, and looked up at me with those steady eyes. Grandpa, will you always live here? The question landed somewhere soft and unguarded. I put my hand on top of her head. This is my house, Peanut, I said. I'm not going anywhere. She took that as settled fact, the way children do when they trust the person telling them completely, and tucked herself back against my arm to keep watching the squirrel. I want to be honest with you, because I don't want you thinking I was blind to what had been building under that roof. 16 months of shared space wears grooves into things. There'd been tension I couldn't quite point to nothing I could have written down and handed a lawyer, just a feeling, the way the air changes before a storm even while the sky's still clear. But that morning, with Nora warm against me and the hydrangeas budding and the squirrel working the feeder, that morning still felt like a good one. I didn't know it'd be the last easy morning I'd get for a long while. 6 days after that morning on the steps, I was upstairs putting back a toolbox I'd borrowed for Corey's project, some shelving he never finished, when I heard Renee's voice through the crack of Nora's door. It was a Thursday afternoon, Corey still at the office, the house holding that particular stillness it gets when the sun comes low through the west windows. I stopped on the landing, hand on the rail, not moving. Renee's voice was low, even patient the way a person explains a rule they've explained before. Nora, look at me. You listening? Yes, Mommy. Good. Now, when we go to the store today, I need you to do the thing we practiced. Remember the thing we practiced? The sad face? The sad face. And when the nice lady or the nice man asks what's wrong, you say Mommy's car broke down and we don't have money for the bus. You remember the rest? A pause. What if they ask Grandpa Walt to help instead? Grandpa doesn't need to know about this, baby. This is just between you and me. It's a game. People give more when a little girl asks than when a grown-up asks. That's just how people work. Even if it's not true about the bus? It doesn't matter if it's true, sweetheart. It matters if it works. A small pause, and I could hear the smile settle into her voice. Can you show me the sad face again? Real good this time. There was a sound a child performing sorrow on command, small and theatrical and obedient. Then Renee, warm with approval. Perfect, baby. You're gonna make us so much money today. My stomach turned over on itself. I stood there on that staircase, holding an empty toolbox, waiting for the conversation to shift, for some context to arrive and rearrange what I'd just heard into something smaller than it was. It didn't come. Then Nora asked, small and curious. What if Grandpa Walt asks where the money came from? You tell him we found a coupon, Renee said. Or you don't say anything at all. You let me handle Grandpa. My chest went tight in a way I didn't have a name for. I set the toolbox down quietly in the hallway and walked back downstairs, one step at a time, hand steady on the rail even though nothing in me felt steady. In the kitchen I poured a glass of water and drank it, standing at the sink, looking out at Margaret's hydrangeas, budded and patient, and completely indifferent to what I'd just heard. I ran it through my head the way I used to run diagnostics on a failing system, looking for the misread, the missing piece, the explanation that would change the conclusion. I found none. This wasn't a slip of temper or a parent venting in a tired moment. This was rehearsed, repeated, praised when performed correctly. That wasn't an accident. That was training. And Nora, 6 years old, Margaret's eyes, a rabbit with one chewed ear, a girl who believed hydrangeas could be magic, was being trained to lie to strangers for money and trained to keep it from me. By the time I heard them heading out the door that afternoon, I'd made a decision. That evening, once Nora was down, I was going to sit with Renee and say what needed saying, calm and direct, the way I'd handled every hard conversation in 40 years of marriage and boiler rooms and fatherhood. I had no idea, standing at that sink, how badly I'd misjudged what I was up against. I waited until the house settled into that particular quiet that comes after a child falls asleep, when the running feet stop and the questions stop and the air goes still. I found Renee in the living room, feet tucked under her on the couch, phone in hand, TV murmuring low. Renee, I said, you got a minute? She set the phone face down. Sure, Dad. I sat across from her in the chair that used to be Margaret's, and I kept my voice level. I came up for the toolbox this afternoon, and I happened to hear part of a conversation you were having with Nora. She didn't so much as blink. I'm not trying to start a fight, I said. I want to raise a concern. What I heard, the sad face. The story about the bus. Telling her to keep it from me. I don't think that's a habit that serves her well. Kids who learn that lying gets rewarded carry that into, I didn't ask what you think. Her voice had gone flat. Flat the way a road goes flat right before it drops off a cliff. I know you didn't, I said, steady. But I live here, and Nora's my granddaughter, and what she learns under this roof matters to me. You've been doing this for 16 months. She unfolded off the couch, voice climbing just enough to notice. Every look, every little comment. Like I don't know how to raise my own daughter. And that's not what I said. You implied it. You always imply it. Her eyes had gone very still, very flat. You're retired, Dad. You sit in this house all day with nothing to do but watch everybody else and decide you know better. You've done enough damage for one lifetime, old man. Maybe worry about yourself. The words landed the way words like that land, not because they hurt exactly, but because of the sheer, open ugliness of hearing them out loud in the living room where Margaret used to read to Renee when she was small enough to fit in her lap. The front door opened. Corey stepped in, tie loosened, briefcase in hand, and stopped dead when he felt the temperature of the room. His eyes went from Renee to me, and back. Renee's whole posture changed in an instant. Her shoulders dropped, her chin trembled, and her voice, when she spoke to Corey, came out small and wounded. Your father just told me I'm teaching Nora to be a liar. My stomach dropped. That is not what I said. I came in here just to fold laundry and he started in on me, she said, pressing her fingers to her mouth, eyes going glassy right on cue. He does this. He's always doing this. Corey looked at her, the shimmer, the trembling chin, the whole performance, and I watched him decide what he was going to believe. And I watched him shut the door on everything else in the space of about 4 seconds. Walter, he said. My own name, said like it belonged to a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. You need to apologize to my wife. Crane. Corey, I haven't said anything that requires apologize. His jaw set the way I imagine it sets when he's closing a deal he doesn't believe in. Or maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live. The room went very quiet. I looked at this man, 38 years old, standing in my front hallway, telling me, the man whose name was on the deed, whose hands had laid the brick outside and hung the drywall inside, that I might need to find somewhere else to live. Did you just tell the man who owns this house, I said quietly, to leave it? He didn't back down. If that's what it takes. For a moment none of us moved. The television kept murmuring in the background, absurd against what had just been said. I looked at Renee. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name, not triumphant, but close, the look of somebody who's played a card and is waiting to see how it lands. All right, I said. I set my hands at my sides, turned, and walked down the hall to my room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a thing. I closed the door the way Margaret always said a person should close a door when they're truly angry, soft, deliberate, so the click of the latch is the loudest sound in the room. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark a long while, hands on my knees, and let myself feel the whole weight of it. The anger, the grief underneath the anger, the exhaustion of fighting a war I never signed up for, in a house I built with my own 2 hands. Then I took a breath, and I started thinking. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in what I can only call armed politeness. Good morning in the kitchen. Good night in the hall. I smiled at Nora every chance I got and pretended, for her sake, that nothing underneath the floorboards had shifted. If you'd walked in off the street as a stranger, you might have thought we were just a quiet family living a quiet life. You'd have been wrong. It was a Saturday, early May, when Corey mentioned he was heading out to a client golf outing. He left before 8. Clubs rattling in his trunk. The house felt different with him gone looser. The way a room feels after somebody holding their breath finally leaves it. I was in my chair with coffee and the paper, settled where Margaret used to sit, when I heard Nora's sneakers pounding down the stairs at full 6-year-old speed, arms out for balance. She clipped the corner of the bookshelf on her way past, and Margaret's clock, the little brass mantel clock she'd wound every Sunday for 30 years, the one thing of hers I still touched every week, rocked once, twice, and went over the edge. I was out of my chair before I decided to move. Wasn't fast enough. It hit the hardwood and the glass face shattered, brass pieces skidding across the floor. Nora froze in the middle of the room, eyes enormous, chest heaving. She looked at the pieces, then up at me, and her lower lip started to go. Real fear, the honest kind. hands balling into fists at her sides. "Grandpa, I didn't mean—" "Hey!" I crouched down to her level, kept my voice as soft as I could manage even with my heart somewhere up in my throat. "I know you didn't, Peanut. It was an accident. You hurt?" "What happened?" Renee's voice came from the kitchen doorway. She stood there in her robe, coffee mug in hand, taking in the scene, the brass shards, Nora's stricken face, me crouched on the floor. Her eyes moved over it all with an efficiency that turned my stomach cold. Then she looked at Nora, and something passed between them, quick and deliberate, a look with instructions folded inside it. "Tell Grandpa it's his fault for putting it somewhere you'd run into it," Renee said, calm as anything. Nora's face changed. The real fear, the trembling lip, the balled fists, all of it flickered and reset. She looked at her mother. Then she looked at me, and I watched the exact second a 6-year-old chose the path she'd been taught to choose. "Grandpa," Nora said, voice small and strange, "it's your fault." Those words hit somewhere I didn't have a name for. Not because a child said them, but because it was this child 20 minutes earlier sprinting down those stairs with her whole small body full of uncomplicated Saturday morning joy, and now standing 4 feet away reciting a line she'd been handed like a script. I didn't argue. I didn't look at Renee. I got down on my knees on the hardwood and started gathering the pieces of Margaret's clock one at a time. The brass was cold against my fingers. Behind me I heard Renee say, bright and unbothered, "Come on, baby. Let's get you some cereal." Like she'd just settled a minor scheduling conflict and not taken something out of me I wasn't sure I'd get back. I stayed on my knees until every piece was in my cupped hands. Then I carried them to my room and set them on the dresser, next to a framed photo of Margaret at the lake, and I sat on the edge of the bed a long time looking at both. That night I started a notebook. Nothing dramatic, a cheap spiral thing from the drugstore. Date, time, what was said, who said it. Attitude. I wrote down the sad-face conversation from memory, as close to word for word as I could manage. I wrote down the clock. I told myself I was doing it so I wouldn't lose the thread of my own sanity, and that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Some part of me, even then, was building a case, though I wasn't yet honest enough with myself to call it that. Over the next 4 months, I kept writing. I wrote down the Tuesday Renee took Nora to 3 different grocery stores and came home with $60 in cash, and a story about a broken-down car that had never once left the driveway. I wrote down the afternoon I heard Nora practicing the sad face alone in the bathroom mirror, humming while she did it, like it was a dance recital instead of a lie. I wrote down every time Corey called me useless, every time Renee told him some version of what I'd started, every time I closed my door soft instead of loud. I want to tell you, the middle of a thing like this doesn't feel like a story. It feels like Tuesday, and then another Tuesday, and then 100 more, each one a little heavier than the last, until one day you realize you've been carrying something for so long you've forgotten what your shoulders felt like before it. In June, I drove to see George Feldman, who'd handled Margaret's estate and my own paperwork for going on 15 years. I brought the notebook. He read every page without saying a word, then looked up at me over his glasses. "Walter," he said, "this is your house. Sole owner, clear title, no debt on it. Nobody in that house has any legal claim to it whatsoever." "I know that," I said. "I want to do this right, quiet, clean. No shouting matches for that little girl to remember." He nodded slowly. "Then we do it right." We started the paperwork that day, the notice, the timeline, and something else I hadn't planned on discussing until he brought it up himself. My will. I'd had everything going to Renee outright. George suggested a trust instead, one that would hold things for Nora until she was old enough to use them properly, administered by someone other than her parents. I sat with that a long moment. Then I said, "Draw it up." Through July, I kept living in that house like a man walking through his own life in socked feet, careful not to make a sound before he was ready. I said good morning, I said good night. I watched Nora chase fireflies in the backyard and felt something crack open in my chest every single time, because I knew what was coming, and she didn't, and there wasn't a way to protect her from all of it, only some of it. One Friday evening in late July, I sat in the living room with a book while Corey watched a ball game across from me. Volume low, the ceiling fan turning slow overhead. If you'd walked in as a stranger, you'd have thought 2 men sharing an ordinary evening. You'd have been wrong about ordinary. You'd have been right about the quiet. Upstairs I could hear Nora's feet, then her laugh, bright and unguarded, moving down through the ceiling and into me. 10 minutes later, she appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, hair damp from the bath, rabbit dangling from one hand. Grandpa Walt. She crossed the room with the directness of a person who knows exactly where she's headed, stopped at the arm of my chair, and looked up at me. Good night. My throat did something complicated. I put my hand on top of her damp hair. Good night, Peanut. Sleep well. She leaned into my arm for a few seconds. I counted them. The way you count things you know you're going to want to remember, then straightened and announced, with total seriousness, I'm gonna dream about the beach tonight. Good choice, I told her, and she grinned, wide and bright, and entirely her own, before padding back up the stairs. After a while, Corey set down the remote and looked at the television instead of at me. You know, Walter, he said, if you just apologize to Renee, we could put all this behind us. Corey and us. I set my book down in my lap. I looked at him a long moment, the set of his jaw, the TV light moving across his face. What exactly would go back to normal, Corey? I asked. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Not cold, just honest. He didn't answer. He changed the channel, then changed it back. His jaw worked once, tightened, released. I gave him room to say something true if he wanted to. He didn't take it. Now, good night, I said, and went to bed. I opened the notebook to the first page and read every entry front to back. It took 40 minutes. The last one, dated 2 days earlier, read, Trust documents signed and notarized. I closed the notebook, set my hand flat on the cover a moment, then turned off the light. At 7 the next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee going lukewarm in my hands and made one phone call. George. Today. A pause on the other end, not surprise, just a man shifting gears. I'll be there at 10. Notice is already drafted. I'll have a locksmith there by 10:30. End. Thank you, George. I hung up, finished my coffee, and at 8:30, when the sounds of the house waking up started filtering down the stairs, I did something I hadn't done in months. I sat down at the kitchen table and waited. Renee came in first, saw me sitting there, and stopped, one hand still on the doorframe, running the fast mental math she always ran when something had shifted outside her expectations. George's car pulled into the driveway at 10 sharp. A second car, the locksmith's van, right behind him. Corey came down the stairs half-dressed, tie hanging loose, and stopped cold in the doorway when he saw George at the kitchen table with a folder in front of him. Dad, Renee said, her voice gone thin. What is this? This is my house, I said quietly. You told the man who owns it to leave. I'm choosing not to. George slid the paperwork across the table, a formal notice. 30 days, clean and legal and without a single raised voice behind it. Corey stood there in the doorway, a man who'd just had the floor go out from under him and was working out which way was down. Dad, he said, and his voice came out smaller than I'd heard it in the 16 months I'd known him. You can't just... I can, I said, and I have. I excused myself and walked to the back door while the locksmith got to work. Nora stood in the hallway, uncertain, drawn out by the noise. Hey, Peanut, I said. Come help me check on Grandma Margaret's hydrangeas. She took my hand without a single question, and we went out back together while the world rearranged itself behind us. We stood among the flowers, June full and stubborn, and she asked me why bees liked some flowers and not others, and I told her it was about which ones worked hardest to be worth visiting. At noon I ordered sandwiches, and we ate on the back steps, turkey and apple slices, her favorite. She put her small hand over mine on the step between us. Grandpa, I like eating out here with you. My eyes went fierce and warm all at once. I like it too, Peanut, I said, more than you know. They were gone by the 1st of September. I know the date because I stood at the front window and watched Corey's car pull out for the last time, back seat loaded with boxes, Renee's face turned away from the house. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Grief, clean and uncomplicated, for the version of all this that should have existed and never got the chance to. The house went quiet in a way it hadn't been in 16 months. I cleaned Nora's room the next morning, straightened her books, lined her stuffed animals up along the windowsill exactly as she'd had them. I didn't pack any of it away. I left it there in case she came back looking for it. 5 weeks later, on a Wednesday night in October, Renee called. Her voice was different, flatter, quieter, in a way that had nothing to do with the volume. He told me last week he only stayed married to me because leaving felt harder than staying, she said, without any preamble at all. Said he'd been unhappy since Nora was 2. My hand tightened around the phone. I said nothing and let her keep going. Dad, was I always like that? The way I was with you? Or did something happen to me? Her voice cracked on the last word, raw, genuinely lost. I think you made choices, Renee, I said, steady as I could manage. That's not the same as saying none of it can change from here. She breathed in, out, in. I'm sorry, Dad. For the things I said. For all of it. The words landed somewhere deep. Somewhere that had been waiting 7 months to hear them. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose until the sharp edge of it passed. I know, I said. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then, can I come see you? This is still your father's house, I told her. It always was. In November, she came on a Saturday morning and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and it wasn't the same as it used to be, but it was something. She asked about the will. I told her about the trust, about Nora, about the fact that I no longer trusted the version of herself she'd been living inside of for the last few years, and that I hoped, genuinely, that it would change. Can I keep coming back? She asked. The door's open, I said. It always has been. December came in gray and cold the way Ohio winters settle into the bones of old houses. I was in the backyard wrapping burlap around Margaret's hydrangeas when I heard footsteps on the garden path. I turned around. Nora was running toward me in a coat 2 sizes too big, sneakers soaked through, face red from the cold and wet from something that wasn't the weather. She crashed into me full speed and buried her face against my chest, and she was crying, not the practiced sad face her mother had taught her, but the real kind. The kind that shakes a person from somewhere underneath the ribs. I went down on both knees in the wet grass without thinking twice and got my arms around her. Hey, I said, low and steady. I've got you, Peanut. I've got you. Mommy said I have to be mad at you, she said, voice coming apart in pieces. But I'm not mad, Grandpa. I don't hate you. I don't. My eyes burned so fierce I had to close them a second. I held her tighter. The rain kept coming, light and cold, and neither of us moved. After a while, she pulled back and looked up at me, swollen-eyed, rain-streaked. Are you mad at me? I shook my head. My voice, when I found it, came out barely above a whisper. Never, not for 1 single second, Peanut. She searched my face the way children search faces when they need the truth and have learned they don't always get it. Something in her settled. She let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned back into me. I held my granddaughter in the December rain, in the garden her grandmother had planted, and I understood, fully and finally, what all of this had been for. Not the house, not the trust, not the notebook or the locksmith or the 30 days' notice. This girl, this moment, the certainty settling into her that there was one place in the world where she was safe and wanted and completely herself. No performance required. I called Renee once Nora was dry and warm at the kitchen table with cocoa wrapped in both small hands. She's here, I said. She's safe. Come when you're ready. Nora looked up at me over the rim of her mug. Grandpa, can I visit you all the time? I sat down across from her in my kitchen, in my house on Cardinal Ridge Road, and looked at this child with her grandmother's eyes and her whole life still ahead of her. Anytime you want, Peanut, I said. This door's always open for you. Looking back now, on everything that happened in those 8 months, the sad face, the broken clock, the notebook, the papers, the 30 days I keep arriving at the same place. I wasn't a perfect father. I wasn't a perfect man. There were things I should have said to Renee years before any of this started. Conversations I let slide because peace felt easier than the truth. If I could go back, I wouldn't wait. I'd say the hard things sooner, with more love and less patience for the kind of silence that lets rot take hold. Don't be like me in that one way. Don't wait until the house is already on fire to decide what you're willing to protect. What I know now, what this year taught me at 66 years old, is that dignity isn't something other people hand you. It's something you either hold on to or you let go of. And the moment you let go of it, not for pride's sake, but for the sake of the child watching you do it, that's the moment everything underneath you starts to give way. I believe in the quiet kind of justice, not the loud kind. The kind that shows up on a Saturday morning with a folder and a locksmith and 30 days written plainly on a page. This is what it looks like when an old man has nothing left to prove to anybody except a 6-year-old girl who still thinks hydrangeas might be magic, if you ask her. I've lived long enough now to believe things find their way back to where they belong, in their own time, not ours. If this one moves something in you, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I'll be reading. And if you've lived something close to this, or love somebody who has, stay a while longer, there's another story waiting right after this one.